And you can go ahead.
All right, awesome. All right, so the basis for what we're going to have to talk about has its roots in here in a great quote by Peter Drucker, which is that the customer never buys a product. This is one of those things I think is one of the absolute sheer brilliance of Peter Drucker, is that he said things so eloquently and simply, but you really have to think about them in order to parse down what it is he means by it. So the customer never buys a product, which on its face, you're like, well, what do you mean he never buys a product? Of course, that's what we sell. We sell products, services, knowledge, whatever. And Drucker says, no, by definition, the customer buys the satisfaction of a want. He buys value. And the way that I would think about it this way is that the customer really buys an outcome. There's been much written about this subject. So, for example, following on Drucker here in his quote, he says that a customer doesn't buy a drill; they buy a quarter-inch hole in the wall, right? So they buy some kind of an outcome. So let me quickly describe one of the differences between these things, between an input, an output, and an outcome, and that what we want to focus our pricing strategy on is this notion of outcomes. Right? And I think it's a little bit hard for people to maybe sometimes make the leap, mostly because they're so closely connected with whatever it is that they're doing. So I have a friend, Tim Williams, brilliant strategic mind, who had a rental property, or he has a rental property. I think he still has it. And he wanted to hire a landscaper for this rental property. And he calls up 3 different people, and they come out, and the first one says to him, well, it's going to be $25 an hour. It'll probably take me about 2 hours to do all this. This guy's like, okay, so fine. So that was the first one. The second guy comes out and says, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to mow your lawn. I'm going to trim edge. I'm going to trim the bushes and shrubs and trees, make sure that that's okay, rake the leaves. So he gave a laundry list of all of the stuff that he was going to do for Tim, and he said, I'm going to be $200 a month. Okay? Third guy comes out, and he actually engages Tim in a little bit of a conversation and finds out, oh, this is a rental property, so you really don't want to have to worry so much about this. He's like, yeah, it's really kind of a pain. Just want to make sure that it's in good shape for the people who are coming and staying at my place. He's like, okay. So the guy says to him, well, I will sell you, what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to make sure that your property here has the best curb appeal in the neighborhood. Best curb appeal in the neighborhood. What this guy was selling or positioning is not an input, which was hours, not an output, which is here's the things that I'm going to do for you, but instead he sold an outcome, right? The best curb appeal in the neighborhood. And I think one of the first challenges in pricing and pricing strategy is to really do some deep thinking around what is the actual outcome that you or your business sells. And that's not, oftentimes that is not an easy thing to think about and go through, right? So like, do you think you sell drills or quarter-inch holes in walls? Do you think you sell railroads, or are you in the transportation business? Do you think you sell software, or are you in the business that makes sure that a customer's accounting system is up and running properly, right? So there's all kinds of different ways to think about this, but try to put some energy and spend some time thinking around the strategic question of what is the outcome that your business provides. All right, so that's the first thing to think about. Think about that first, and then that leads to all of these other things that we're gonna talk about now. Okay, pricing is a function of strategy. Again, one of Drucker's ideas is called the marketing concept, and there are the 3 P's of marketing. Let me see if I can remember them off the top of my head: product, placement, promotion, and price. Okay, I did. I was able to remember. Okay, and so price is one of the functions of marketing. So there's a first clue, by the way, into your organization, is that Drucker talked about price being a function of marketing. Far too often, I think that small businesses or businesses just getting started think of pricing not as a marketing function, but they put the person in charge of the pricing who's ever doing the work, right? who's ever performing the task, who's ever, or they put the accountant in charge of pricing because they're the ones who deal with numbers. I don't think that pricing is an accounting function. I don't think that it's a sales function. It's a separate function. It needs to be separated out from the rest of the organization, and usually falling under the marketing department, because the marketing's job is, quite simply, to understand the market, right? That's why we call it marketing. So to understand the marketing, to understand the market that the customer is in. So it should really be a marketing function setting price. So there are only two overarching marketing strategies, and they are to be moderately appealing to a larger group of people, right? Or to be intensely appealing to a smaller group of people. Neither of these, I think, is right or wrong, but I do know that I have a bias for the second, especially among small businesses. And the reason is because I think it is much easier for a smaller business, a business who's growing, to be intensely appealing to a smaller group of people. The big challenge is to really refine and understand who that smaller group of people is, because it isn't necessarily or always just a demographic, right? It isn't necessarily just a geographic circle around your organization, 75-mile radius around Kenosha, Wisconsin, or wherever it is that you happen to be. All right, so that's normally the default value. What we have to decide who that smaller group of people really is. And sometimes it takes a while to hone and find who that smaller group of people is. I'll give you an example. I have a friend of mine who owns a themed events company. So what they do is they do mostly, a lot of their big thing is casino type events, right? Where you have a casino party and you're playing with funny money, right? It's not anything where you're actually betting. It's illegal in the state of Texas to do that. So, but it's a themed event. But he also does things like he rents a lighted disco floor, right? He has big, huge, beanbag chairs, and he has a Jenga game that's 6 feet tall, and so he has all of these different things that are part of this themed events party when you want to have some kind of a party. And I had lunch with him a couple of years ago, and one of the things that he said to me was really quite profound. He said, Ed, it took me about 3 years to understand who my smaller group of people, he called it his target market, really was. He said, when I first started the company, I thought my market was people who were going to have parties, right? And that's what I focused on. I tried to find out the organizations and people who were having parties. So we tried to gather people's birthdays and anniversary information, all those kinds of things. And we always knew that we were going to have a certain number of parties around graduations and Christmas and all of those things. So he said that was good, and business was okay. But his business didn't really take off until that he understood that his real customer, his big customers that provided him with a lot of business, were what are called destination management companies. And these are people who manage conferences when they come into, in this case, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, right? And he said it took him 3 years to recognize that he had to focus on that smaller group of people who was the destination management companies, right? So, and once he did that, the business just has absolutely taken off, and now he has a huge amount of warehouse space that he stores all this stuff. Anyway, right? I think that is a big challenge for businesses from a marketing perspective to decide who those smaller group of people are, right? Because it's not necessarily the people that you think right off out of the gate who you're trying to target, right? So I actually find the second one a little bit appealing, because when you find that group, when you find that Venn diagram distilled down to who that smaller group of people is based on all kinds of different criteria, it's much easier to focus on that. And I believe then from a price perspective, commands a more premium type price. The first strategy, again, not bad, but I just find it a little bit more difficult to do. And from a pricing perspective, as putting my pricer's hat on, it is a lot more challenging to command a premium price when you're trying to be moderately appealing to a larger group of people. Good quick example of this would be Apple versus, say, Dell, right? Dell's strategy was clearly this first. They want, and it continues to be, they want to be moderately appealing to a larger group of people, right? But Apple has always taken the tack that what they want to do is they want to be intensely appealing to a smaller group of people, and you notice they're the ones who command a higher price, right? They're the ones who command that higher price because they have that brand loyalty surrounding the what I like to refer to as Apple bigots. By the way, I'm one of them, so I can say that. All right, so there's only these two basic marketing strategies. So now what I want to share with you, narrowing this down a little bit, is that there are only 3 pricing strategies. And there are different ways to put these things together, but ultimately, once we decide who that smaller group of people is, there are only 3 pricing strategies. It's skim, neutral, and penetration. And I said them in a different order that's on the slide, but that's okay. Okay, so skim, penetration, and neutral. Let's first we'll work our way from the bottom up here. A neutral price is exactly what it is. That you're setting your price, or your strategy around setting your price is, we don't want to be the most expensive, we don't want to be the cheapest, right? We want to be somewhere in the middle. That's a neutral pricing strategy. It is used by the vast majority of businesses, right? It's probably more than 80%. I don't have the research on it, but just a gut number is that about 80% of businesses use a neutral pricing strategy. They want to understand what the competitors are charging, and they don't want to be the cheapest in the marketplace, but they don't want to be the most expensive in the marketplace. Okay, so that's the first pricing strategy, neutral. The second would be a penetration strategy. Now, what is good about a penetration strategy is that it gets you into a specific market. In fact, that's the whole notion, right? You're penetrating into a specific market, right? The challenge is that it usually, although not always, but it usually means a lower price in the market space, right? You're trying to penetrate into an already existing market space, and the way to do that is sometimes to attract people via a lower price. Now, this is not always bad. It's not always a bad thing to do if your organization has figured an S-curve shift in lowering the cost of delivery, right? So in a way, you're still commanding a high price, but it's because you're doing something differently from the cost side that allows you to get into that market and penetrate that market in a different way, right? The challenge that I see is that people ought to make a lot of mistakes. They've used penetration pricing strategy when really they're just an also-ran. They just have the same thing everybody else has, but they just trying to get into a market by being cheaper, by selling it less expensive. And typically what happens is this ends up leading to a price war in which the incumbent usually wins because they've been around longer and can sustain a price war for longer than someone who's trying to penetrate it, who has the same cost structure, right? So again, penetration can be good, but only when you think that you or your organization has figured out a different mode, a way to significantly reduce the cost of delivery on your side. Now, the other way that you can use penetration pricing is when you have what's called a loss leader type product. And then what your innovation is a newer product that's going to be appealing to those loss leader customers. The quick example of a loss leader that everyone recognizes because it's over 100 years old is Gillette and razor blades and handles, right? To this day, you can still buy the handle, the Gillette, whatever it is, Mach 3. I don't know what they're up to. They're up to Mach 27 or something. It vibrates and does all kinds of crazy stuff, right? But that handle, when they sell one of those handles with the sheet of blades, they lose money on that transaction. That purchase they lose money on. However, they make a boatload on selling all of the razors subsequently, right? And now by the way, there's a penetration pricing strategy in there. I think it's, dollarrazor.com or something. So there's I don't know what their market is, whether they're using penetration because they have a lower cost of delivery. I'm not quite sure. But the point being is that that's the example of a loss leader, where you've got a product that you're selling at a loss. You know you're selling it, going to sell at a loss because you can make it up by selling some ancillary product behind it. So that's another potential use of a penetration pricing strategy. So again, when you have a product, a service, or a knowledge that you know you're going to be losing on, but you know that you've got this other thing behind it that those same customers will be very interested in purchasing if you can connect those two together. And then finally, there's skim pricing. And skim pricing is, of course, exactly what it sounds like. You're skimming the cream off the top, right? You're just looking for the people who are willing to pay a higher price for perhaps a higher quality product, right? And if this is Apple's strategy. Apple uses skim pricing. So Disney uses skim pricing. So you can think about all of the organizations where they're not really interested in having any kind of a price war. Starbucks, another example of skim-based pricing. They're not interested in taking away Dunkin' Donuts customers who are going to complain that they have to pay $4 for coffee, where at Dunkin' Donuts they can pay $4 for a cup of coffee, 2 donuts, and an orange juice, right? They're servicing in different markets, right? So that goes back to their smaller group of people that they want to be intensely appealing to. Okay, so I'm going to quick pause, take a drink here, and also just ask that if you do have a thought or a question, please go over to the question panel and go ahead and type that in. I am monitoring the chat window as well, but better if you do the question one because it's a little easier for me to scroll through just from a presenter side. So go ahead and take a look at that, and I'm going to have something to drink. All right, so we've talked a little bit about the 2 overall marketing strategies, then we've narrowed the focus down a little bit to the 3 types of pricing strategies, and now I want to talk about 2 basic pricing methodologies. Now, there are more than just these 2, unlike the other thing that there's only 2 and there's only 4, only 3. There are different ways other than these 2, but these are the 2 most often used. And what I like about setting them up is they are completely contrasting one another, right? So let's talk about these 2 basic pricing methods. The first one is known as cost-led pricing, right? Cost-led pricing. We develop a product, service, knowledge, some offering, right? Again, this is another way of saying either output or outcome, right? We try to understand what the costs of that thing is, whatever the costs of delivery are going to be. We then set a price that's above that cost, right? Which 10% more, 20% more becomes some number. We want to make sure that we have our price is higher, and then we hope that the customer, who's the end of this chain, values that at more than our price, right? Values that at more than our price. Okay, so you can see the flow here. It's the development of the product, service, knowledge, understanding the cost, which leads to a price, which we then pray that the customer sees the value, right? So this is cost-led pricing because we're leading here primarily with making sure that we cover our costs, right? The next one, and to contrast this one, and the one that I like much, much better, is known as value-led pricing. A value-led price is one in which that the price is determined, is mostly, not exclusively, right? This is not the sole determining input, but it is the primary input, is based on the value to the customer, the perceived value of the customer, right? So this chain is the exact opposite of the first. We first understand the customer and what's important to that customer and what the customer values. We then say, okay, we then set a price where we understand that the customer would be willing to pay a price because the value is higher than to the customer. And then, and this is the important part, then we say, are we justified in the expenditure of cost to be able to build that product, service, or knowledge, or whatever it is that we're trying to do? The key difference here is this chain is completely reversed. I like the second one for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's focused on the customer, right? It's focused up front on the understanding of the customer. So the way to do this varies from industry to industry. With professional firms, the way to understand this customer value is to have a conversation with the customer, each individual customer. Now, you can't do that from a retail or mass marketed service perspective. So instead, the way that this is usually done is by some kind of a customer or a survey, right? And research, basic research that tries to parse around the underlying value to the customer segment that you're trying to get into. But the key is that you must first understand this customer value before you set price, right? And then once you then set the price, then you ask the question, can we do it for that price in terms of the cost needed to develop that? So think of it this way. In one way, cost-led pricing, costs determine the price. They're the primary input into the price. That's the top one. And in the second one, price justifies the expenditure of cost. Price justifies the expenditure of cost. That's a very important point, and it's a key difference. And most businesses do not understand it, and most businesses don't ever think about it in those kinds of terms. I actually have a struggle with the first one because it's based on a faulty theory. The theory is called the labor theory of value, right? The labor theory of value is what leads us to cost-led pricing. It says that this paperclip here, right? The price of this paperclip, it was determined by all of the costs that it took to put this paperclip together. So the mining of the metal, the development of the plan. We have the lacquer, I guess, that's on the black portion of this. So whatever labor it took to assemble this paperclip together, that's then we would determine the price based on that. That's a problem because this theory is false. It's been falsified for almost probably over 100 years. By the way, the theory, it was developed by an economist in the 1850s, 1857 to 1860 roughly. This economist developed this theory called the labor theory of value. The economist's name is Karl Marx. When you price primarily based on your cost, you're practicing Marxism. And generally that doesn't work out so well. It's difficult to improve profitability when you're using a guy's theory who thought that profit was immoral. So that's one of the challenges. This value-led pricing was really developed initially from an economic standpoint by what are called the marginalist revolutions. And Carl Menger, Stanley Jevons, and I can't remember the third, but these guys says that value is subjective. Value is what the customer says it is, right? And we have to understand that value first. The way I can falsify the cost-led theory, just think about it this way. A bottle of water is the value of that bottle or the value of the water is insanely subjective. Right? You can buy a bottle of water at an event, a sporting event, and it might be $8 a liter. You can buy that same bottle of water, and it might be 25 cents a liter at a grocery store, or cheaper at a Sam's Club. But also that same quantity of water, if you're getting it out of your tap or your refrigerator, like I did, you would only pay pennies for, right? And if the water is spilled on your floor, it actually has negative value because we got to go get a paper towel and clean up the water from the floor, right? So the same quantity of water can have this insanely different value, perceived value, and it's the same stuff. And from a cost perspective, from a cost accounting perspective, it's not that much different from a cost perspective to get the water to those different places, the sporting event, your house, or the floor of your house, right? So there's not a lot of difference in cost, but there is an insane difference in the perceived value of that water. So that's why we have to understand what that perception of the value is. Okay. Now, why is this stuff so important? Why? Well, because pricing is absolutely, positively, without question, the one driver in profitability in an organization. right? And this has been proven over and over again. In this study here, there's two of them, one by McKinsey and Company, the other by A.T. Kearney, two large consulting firms. But they came up with these numbers. And this is a 1% improvement in these 4 different factors. The first factor is a reduction of fixed cost, right? So if you reduce your fixed cost by 1%, you'll see an improvement to profitability of somewhere between 1.5 and 2.7%. Okay? If you increase your revenue by 1%, now this is not pricing, this is revenue. In other words, rainmaking, new customer acquisition, right? Those kind of things. That's what they mean here by revenue. So increasing revenue, net new customers, new sales, 1% improvement in that will 2.5 to 3.7. What is usually considered the holy grail of business, and that is the reduction of variable costs, will net you somewhere between a 4.6 to a 7.3 increase to profitability, and this is why so many people focus on this. This is the efficiency crowd, right? This is the Lean Six Sigma Guru Ninja Turtle people, right? Trying to eke out efficiencies because, granted, a reduction in variable cost can yield to what I think is a temporary increase to profitability. But notice this: a 1% increase to price yields somewhere between a 7 and 11% increase to profitability, right? So think about that, a 1% increase to price. Now, what pricers have found, and by the way, I am on the faculty of the Professional Pricing Society. Yes, there is such a thing, right? The Professional Pricing Society. And what pricers have begun to understand is that if we focus on becoming a better pricer, not only can we have a 1% improvement in our price capability, but sometimes we can have a 10, 20, or even 30% increase in our pricing power, right? In our ability to drive pricing. And this is huge. I'll explain why in just a few minutes, right? Well, actually, just do the math on that, right? Can you imagine even if you have a 10% increase in pricing power, what you're going to see to bottom line profitability is an increase of somewhere around 71 to 110% increase to profitability, right? Now, just to also dispel a quick notion about this, because there's the supply and demand curve are great things, right? And I'm not dismissing them. I think that understanding macroeconomics microeconomics, which is price theory, is a critically important thing. However, what is often misunderstood is that there are so many assumptions that go into that supply and demand curve to make it almost useless for any business to use. And the reason for that is because the examples that are always used are like guns and butter, right? Or some kind of a commodity, wheat, right? Coffee, right? Those are the examples where, and don't get me wrong, so the supply and demand curves are extraordinarily useful and have a high deal of explanatory power. But once you get to the business level, what we as independent businesses develop, whether it's software or staplers or hand cream or landscaping or anything, those are no longer commodity type issues. But I hear this all of the time. I hear business people all the time say, well, what we do is a commodity, right? Well, that's nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. Go back to my water example. What could be more of a commodity than water, right? Yet you pay $8 for a bottle of water at a sporting event, right? It's no longer a commodity at a sporting event because of the different circumstances and the different time and place. Because again, that value is completely subjective. So just wanted to talk a little bit about that for those of you who might have studied economics and are thinking, well, is he going to talk about supply and demand? Well, yes, I am, but not that way. All right. We've got a couple more things we want to talk about here. First of all, I love this quote from Warren Buffett, who really, the sage of Omaha, who does understand this stuff. He gets a lot right. He gets a lot of stuff wrong too, but he understands this. And he says the single most important decision in evaluating a business is pricing power. And of course, what he's talking about here is Berkshire Hathaway, right? His company, when they are evaluating a business as to whether or not they want to get into this marketplace, they look at their pricing power. If you've got the power to raise prices without losing business to a competitor, you've got a very good business. And if you have to have a prayer session before raising your price by 10%, then you've got a terrible business. All right. So I think that's important for us to understand, is that pricing is the #1 driver in profitability, and it is the #1 indicator. Your ability to raise your prices is a #1 indicator that you're doing a great job at developing an important, valuable business. Now, just quickly, just to drive this point home one last time, I want you to just do a thought experiment in your head, or what Einstein called a Gedanken experiment, right? Just process this through. I want you to think of your revenue last year, okay? I want you to calculate 1% of it. All you got to do is move the decimal point over 2 places, whoop, whoop, okay? So think of your revenue, move the decimal point over 2 places, and then I want you to take that number and add it to whatever your bottom line was. Okay? That is, and what is the difference in then your revenue? I would guess it's going to be somewhere between 7 and 10%, 7 and 11%. It might be more depending on your business. Again, that was just the averages that McKinsey and Company and A.T. Kearney found. Now, think about this again. What about 10%? Take 10% of your top line and add it to your bottom line. So if you can become a better pricer, it is insane what you will be able to do to drive increase to profitability. It's mind-boggling to really think about it. Okay. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how one goes about becoming a better pricer. The first is to understand that there are factors that factor into the sensitivity of a customer from a price perspective, right? So from a price perspective, there are factors that roll in. And here are, let's see, 9, 10. 10 of these factors that affect pricing sensitivity. Not all of these will pertain to whatever it is that you do, but I promise you at least one, if not more, will. Right? So the key here is to identify here, as I go through this list and give some examples, what are the factors that identify that your product, service, or knowledge is affected by, and to begin to study them a little more and ask questions about. All right, so the first one is what's called the perceived substitute effect, right? What is your product a perceived substitute for? It doesn't have to even be a real substitute. It just has to be a perceived substitute, right? In other words, what could someone do instead of whatever it is that you do to get the same outcome? Classic example, Woolite, right? When I think Unilever owns Woolite, I'm not sure. I'd have to look, but I know it's not Procter & Gamble. Whoever owns Woolite, when they set the price of Woolite at the stores, do they set the price compared to other laundry detergents such as Tide, Cheer, you know, whatever the other ones are, right? Gain, I don't know, there's a not big shopper in this. We buy Tide. So do they set that price for Woolite based on other laundry detergents? And the answer is no, because what they do is Woolite is priced against its perceived substitute, which is, of course, dry cleaning, right? So when they set the price of Woolite, they don't look at the other categories. They don't look at the other places in their market. Instead, they look at the perceived substitute. So this first involves you thinking, what is the perceived substitute of whatever it is that you do? This is sometimes some hard thinking too, right? So what is the perceived substitute? and it can be up or down, by the way, right? Because there could be cheaper substitutes. Unique value. What is it that your product has that is of unique value? And this is where it does tie into other forms of marketing. Volvo, for example, when I say Volvo, what do you think of? What is Volvo's brand most closely tied to? Safety, without question. And it's been years since they've talked about safety, right? Volvo is they command a higher price because they are associated with safety. Michelin, same thing. A lot is riding on your tires. Heinz has a unique value effect, right? And this goes back to a commercial that they ran, I think, in either the late 60s or early 70s, right? Anticipation, Carly Simon, right? And the kid like trying to get the bottle, get the ketchup out of the bottle. So they made it. Their perception was that their product was difficult to use. Right? It was difficult to use, and they made it into a unique value. Our ketchup is thicker than the others. It's worth the wait, though, right? It's worth the wait. Switching costs. Switching from one thing to another. Are there switching costs involved in whatever industry that you have? When Southwest Airlines, for example, one of the biggest challenges Southwest Airlines has encountered in its history was a couple of years ago when they purchased, I think it was AirTran, right? Because it was for the first time in the history of Southwest that they were dealing with planes other than 737s, right? Huge amount of switching costs associated with going from a fleet of 737s to a fleet of 737s and other planes, right? So that airlines, great example of a switching cost. Not often are they going to change over fleets. But another more commercial example might be Amazon. One of the reasons why Amazon has so much of our business and is because when we first started engaging with Amazon, and I just recently found this. I went back to purchases that I made, I think in 2001 or 2002, might be like 1999 or 2000, and Amazon still has that history, and I'm able to get it. And Amazon will still make recommendations based on my purchase history. So for me to switch over to BarnesandNoble.com, I'm not going to do that, right? Because there's a huge amount of switching costs. Difficult comparison, right? Difficult, sometimes this is referred to as price obfuscation. This is why Verizon and AT&T never have the same plan, right? There's never the same number of minutes in the plan, and it's unlimited for different reasons, right? Unlimited really isn't unlimited. You can see all of those different things that they're trying to make it difficult for you to compare one plan to the other of their competitor. Price quality. Right? There is, if you're so lucky as to have this, your high price can sometimes signal quality, right? Certainly Rolls-Royce, high prices tempt, right? When something has a high price, we're almost tempted by it because of the high price. The expenditure effect, and now this affects different things in different ways. If you're selling to businesses, businesses don't look at businesses look at the amount of money, the total amount of money they're spending on, say, paper clips, whereas your household look at it as a percent of the income. So therefore, when you sell paper clips to a household, you can charge a much higher price for the paper clips than you can when you're selling it to a business. Right, because there's two different rationales for it. So the expenditure effect is one of those things. And benefit effect. Example here would be steel that's used on luggage tags for your Tumi bag, right, versus the steel that's used to build a car for Toyota. Right, I'm almost certain that Tumi pays a heck of a lot more for their steel than Toyota does. And why? Not because they're buying more, but because the end benefit. Like Tumi wants to make sure that the steel that they get takes the impression of their name, right? Because it's going to be their name that's going to be in brand that's going to be out there. The shared cost effect. This is also known as who is spending whose money, right? 4 ways to spend money. You can spend your money on yourself, right? We're most efficient with that. You can spend your money on other people. That's a gift, right? So we're less price sensitive when we're buying gifts. You can spend other people's money on yourself. This is known as an expense account, right? Yes, I will have the escargot appetizer. So we're more likely to spend other people's money on us, and we're less concerned with price. And then finally, other people's money on other people. This is known as category 4, by the way, and it's government is like this, because we're spending other people's money on other people, and that's like the least efficient way to spend money, which is why governments have all of these other reasons for putting in bids, and it really is dysfunctional buying, but you get the point. Lastly, the fairness effect, right? The fairness effect. Sometimes the perception of how things work. If you give somebody a cash discount, that's usually perceived as fair, but if you charge the penalty for paying with a credit card, that's perceived as not fair, right? It's the same thing, but there's a perception there. And then lastly, inventory effect, right? This is does your inventory is there a requirement to turn your inventory over on a more frequent basis? Mostly used in like the grocery stores, right? This is why a whole cantaloupe is cheap, or a whole cantaloupe is cheap, but once it's cut into slices, it's more expensive because the perception is higher since they've already done some of the work for you. But then all of a sudden, when that goes on sale the day before it's about to expire, right? And you can buy if you're going to use it that day. So there's lots of things with regard to that inventory. Okay, so one or more of those will perceive to you. So whatever they are, begin to study them. Okay, got about 10 minutes left, and want to go through really, I think, one of the keys to this, and it ties back to the 3 overarching pricing strategies. The first, though, is I want you to worry less about a profit and your pricing once you understand this, and that is that business is not a zero-sum game, right? Business is not a zero-sum game. There are 3 variables at play in any transactions that happen in business. There is your cost, there is your price, and then there's there's your perceived value. Now, what is often seen is the difference between your price and your cost is your profit, right? So you're very much sometimes concerned with the profitability of your organization, and I get that. But I think the thing that people most often miss is that there's the third unseen part of the transaction, and that is your customer's perception of the value, right? Which is higher than your price, otherwise they wouldn't make the trade, right? And I think far too many businesses worry too much about their costs and their price and not enough about the creation of value to their customers. If you can create a much higher value in the perception of your customer's mind, you can increase your price and your customers will be happier about it, right? Again, I was using Starbucks before. I mentioned Starbucks. Well, Starbucks is a good example here, right? Starbucks charges me $4 for my latte. I'm sure their costs are lower. But notice I don't care about their costs. Like I don't walk into Starbucks when I wonder if they got their cost structure figured correctly. I don't care. I certainly care about the price, and I always care about the price, and I would want the price to be lower. But what's more important to me is my perceived value, right? Is that Starbucks to me is worth actually more than $4. Otherwise, I would have gone to Dunkin' Donuts, right, and gotten the cup of coffee, 2 donuts, and the orange juice instead, right? So Starbucks has created a perception in me of a value higher than the price that I'm willing to pay. In a sense, this is my profit on Starbucks. Every time I buy a Starbucks, yes, I give them $4, but I get some kind of a benefit, sometimes just an emotional feeling, right, that is more beneficial than the $4. Otherwise, I would have done something else with it. I think this is the thing that oftentimes people miss. It's certainly the thing that Karl Marx missed, right, in his thinking about it. In fact, he had a word for it. He called it the surplus value, right? And he thought it was the ripping off of the proletariat, right? And he thought it was evil, but it's not, right? Because there's actually this perception. It's why, by the way, in a transaction that takes place, say again Starbucks, I say thank you to the barista, and the barista says thank you to me as I grab my cup of coffee, right? It's because I wanted the cup of coffee more than my $4, and they wanted my $4 more than the cup of coffee, and we were both made better. All right, so now taking that into mind, we also now need to understand some things about pricing. I'm going to point you to a video that you can watch after this, but just write down The Economist Sets Price, right? And this guy, Dan Ariely, and you can go watch the videos. Videos don't translate well into these webcasts, so otherwise I would show you the video. But I want you to go watch it because it's a great example of an organization that you would think that understood pricing, but doesn't really get it, right? They don't really get it. Because otherwise they would have done something completely different. The key to all this is understanding that what we want to do in pricing is to, wherever possible in your organization, and I don't care if you're wholesale, if you're retail, if you are selling widgets, if you're selling knowledge, if you're selling service, doesn't matter. Does not matter what your product is or the anticipated outcome. The key is to make sure that you begin to offer at least 3 choices to every customer, right? Not just 2, but 3. You need to come up with 3 choices for every single customer. And it can be based on either adding or subtracting perceived value to the basic portion of your service. Let me give you an example. Menus do this all of the time. So let me give you one of my favorite examples. And that is, this is the menu at Le Méridien Hotel, that their restaurant called Norma's. This is in New York City. And they have on their menu, it's $1,000 frittata. Okay, first of all, a frittata is an omelet, but you can't call it frittata if you're charging $1,000 for it, right? Okay, so it's the $1 zillion lobster frittata that they charge $1,000 for. By the way, do they know who their customer is in this? You bet they do. I don't know if you can read this on your end, but just get close to the screen. And this is the actual menu. It says Norma dares you to expense this, right? They know that they're dealing with category 3 people, right? There's other people's money on themselves, or sometimes category 4, other people's money on other people. It's a salesperson smoozing a customer, right? So they're spending other people's money on other people, right? So they know the target category. But they also are giving choices here, not only of the $1 zillion frittata, and so instead of the 10 ounces of Saruga caviar, I think, Saruga caviar is like there's 3 fish in a puddle in Russia somewhere, and that's the only place you can get this, right? So, but they'll sell you with 1 ounce, and that's only $100 for the omelet, $100 for the omelet. Right? But you see what they're doing is they're offering choice in their position. Now, they don't sell many of the $1,000 ones, but they sell a bunch of the $100 ones. And in addition, they also sell a bunch of scrambled eggs and bacon quesadilla for $21. Okay? This is because they understand their pricing. They understand their market. Now, certainly, they have a target market, and they've understood that their market is people who are staying mostly at the Le Méridien Hotel, right? So they've already self-selected. I get that. You're not going to be able, if you own a restaurant, you're not going to be able to charge $21 for a bacon and eggs quesadilla, right? Unless you're at the Le Méridien Hotel. But you can still begin to use some of these techniques. The thing here that this $1,000 omelet is known as the anchoring effect, right? You're putting out a very high price that tempts people, and what it does is it makes the other prices that you have to offer look much more palatable, pun intended on the food analogy. So these are the things that we need to begin to offer at least 3 choices. So develop and hone 3 different choices for every single customer, right? And the quicker that you can get this, the better. Let me give you one more example. Our time is short here. And this would be for an airline does this, right? And then I also think that you can do this if you're selling any kind of a profession, in any kind of a professional firm as well, right? Think about the schematic of I think this is a 757. All right, and the airlines set their bulkheads. I'm not talking about Southwest here; it's a different model. So the standard airlines, they set their bulkheads in different areas, and they're willing to sell a certain number of tickets at their discount or Priceline.com prices. But when those run out, they stop selling at those prices and they increase the price. Because what they're really wanting to do is fill most of the plane at full fare coach. And this is mostly with business travelers. And of course, the way that they do this now is they charge more the closer you book to your flight date. Right? This is not directly, but it's a proxy, right? It's an indicator. Somebody buying closer to a date is an indicator that they are likely a business traveler, and therefore are more likely to be spending other people's money and are less price sensitive, right? So that's the reason why they do this, right? And it's also based on the inventory that they have. Airlines move to something called yield management, right? It's not about filling the plane, every single plane. It's about yielding the most revenue from a particular flight, and you can do that and still have the planes 2/3 full, right? That's how they're able to do that. And the spoke and hub system too is another piece of it. But they also know that a certain percentage of their people are going to buy first class no matter what. Now, there's really no difference in the basic service, which is getting from, say, Dallas to New York in 3 hours, right? To any of these people on this plane, they all get the same basic service, which is to go from Dallas to New York. Yes, I guess the front of the plane gets to get off earlier and board first, and they get champagne. But the basic service, which is fly safely from Dallas to New York, doesn't change. And I think that's really the key to understanding that anything in your organization, there can be something that's just the basic, right? Or the one that you want to sell, which might be a middle choice. You might develop a stripped down version of something, and then you might want to develop a higher end version of whatever it is that you have to do. And then think about this. Ultimately, what this means is that what you can begin to do in your organization, right, is adapt all three of these pricing strategies at the same time. You can have a skim price, you can have a neutral price, and you can have a penetration price in offering three different choices. If you think about this, you'll see it all around you. Starbucks does it, Tall Grande Venti. I'm sure your car wash does it, gold, silver, bronze. Federal Express does it, priority overnight, standard overnight, 2-day. Sears did it in the 1800s, good, better, best. This is not anything new. But I do think it's one of the things that is not often looked at. So become a better pricer, because it's the #1 driver of profitability. And remember this, that the majority of pricing mistakes are the result of underpricing in the long term, not overpricing. Okay? Thanks. I hope this was helpful for you. Again, ed.kless@sage.com. If you have any questions for me that you didn't get a chance to ask on the webcast today, follow me at edkless.com, and please take a look at my book, or the soulofenterprise.com is where the radio show is. You can listen to it for free. Got nothing to sell you there. So thanks, Romu. Really appreciate this. You giving me the opportunity to do this series with our customers. I've really enjoyed it.
Of course. Thank you, Ed. Thanks for taking the time. Again, great presentation today. For all of you guys, I also just shared in the chat box the link to our previous webcast, so you can watch the replay if you didn't get a chance to attend in December and November. Again, regarding this webcast, we'll come back to you probably sometime next week with links to the replay, and also give you a chance to send us some questions if you have any. Thank you so much, Ed.
Okay. Thanks, Ramu.
Bye, guys.